Video games have a magical way of exciting my nostalgia. Maybe it's the kid-friendly presentation, maybe it's that I spent a lot of my childhood playing these things, I don't know. But I can't boot up my old favorites without partly traveling back in time. It's like my brain saves the snapshot in time from when I played them way back when, and all of a sudden, my surroundings melt away and I'm back in my old room. I'm reminded of the first time I overcame a gameplay segment which, in hindsight, was never really that difficult. I remember how these worlds seemed to go on forever and how I could lose myself for days on end, walking around them and taking it all in. I think nostalgia is a very beautiful feeling, and a happy little trip back in time is a wonderful gift you can give to yourself. But this sort of nostalgia isn't the focus of this video. Whenever you go back, you can get this nostalgia, whether it's playing a sport you practiced as a kid, visiting your little hometown, or waking up early with your own kids to watch cartoons. It's a good feeling, but the nostalgia we're going over in this video is different. It's the kind that exists within the work, as a foundational pillar of why the game functions and which is leaned on for when the game wants to deliver the powerful moments. And in this video, I'm going to talk about games that talk about nostalgia. It's interesting to think about how often we've tried to gamify nostalgia. This idea of times gone, never to come back, carries an immense power because it's one of the core, uniting human feelings. Everyone has that place where they only saw the good things, that place we all like to go back to from time to time. This idea has real universal appeal. There's no language barrier to remembering the good old days, and since there isn't, it is easier to hit the emotional heights with this than with something more complicated. Also, as a framing device, it lends itself incredibly well to telling stories in a video game because it gives so many excuses for reusing areas, a cost-cutting measure if there ever was one. And reusing areas is very good for game design because input altering the context in which the game world presents itself is not only a good way to present a story progressing, but it also feels very intuitive in the player's hands. Nintendo had experimented with this idea in A Link to the Past, and like with so much from that game, this idea was brought over for Ocarina. It'd be reductionary to say that Ocarina is just A Link to the Past but in 3D though, and I'm also not sure that this really captures what makes Ocarina different. The 3D is less the point of separation between these two games than the addition of childhood and adulthood is. Ocarina of Time is an emotional journey. It was the culmination of Nintendo's cultivated craft at telling stories, and it was also the earliest I've ever seen a Link which I actually connected with on like a human level. How relatable were those opening moments when you first played that game? Do you remember being woken up from a pleasant dream to complete some errand which felt so pointless compared to the comfort of sleeping more? And then going out to hang with some of your friends without making any plans to. It's just that play is the work of children, so that was the impulse when you and your friends met. Do you remember that group hierarchy, how your friends had their friends and you didn't necessarily know them, and then the neighborhood also had those other kids that were in the other group, so you didn't like them? That dynamic is in Ocarina, as is playing in the grass, climbing the rocks, swinging your little wooden stick, all those games that came to you when you were in nature with your imagination. Remember being young and having a mentor figure you knew you could always go to for advice? Kokiri Village is a perfect little microcosm of everyone's childhood. Even if some things don't connect, others are sure to. And it hits very different when you play it today. The presentation stops feeling relatable and starts feeling nostalgic. When you're a kid, Ocarina of Time is about growing to become the hero you need to be to save the world. When you're an adult, all of a sudden it's about the juxtaposition of adulthood and childhood. How age changes the dynamics of relationships. How much friendlier the world always seemed to be way back when. It's the same game, but it plays on your perception of it to stay relevant, even 2 decades after its release. Ocarina makes no attempt to disguise its drawing from the hero's journey, and in that narrative structure, the journey ends with our protagonist coming back home and finding that they aren't. In the start, they left the secure and isolated world of their youth to confront a looming danger. They transformed to meet the threats that faced them, and in that transformation, the hero's relationship with reality also gradually changes as their scope of affairs is altered. The isolated place known as home never changes, but our hero does, and will never be able to go back to such a simple view of the world. And because they can't, they will never truly belong to that place again. They look around now and see the abnormalities. They see how a lack of exposure to a larger world produced the naivete which allowed for the looming danger to manifest in the first place. The hero is too world-weary at tale's end to call such a sheltered place their home. The idea is that to save what is most precious to you, you have to become something which that thing will reject. For more examples of this idea, see Fallout 1 and Shadow of the Colossus. In Ocarina of Time, the moment this idea hits, when you realize that your home is no longer your home, is here. If you're a kid, that is. But if you're an adult, then it probably hit here, right at the start, because right away, you get the nostalgic feels and know immediately how much you've grown from the time and place Ocarina is pulling you towards. I can't stress how beautifully structured I find this game to be and how well I think it plays with its subject matter. I half joked earlier that nostalgia is a great cost-saving mechanism for games because it gives excuses for asset reuse, but video games never shied away from the more introspective side of this emotion. In both asset reuse and subtext, Ocarina of Time is a masterclass. But if we're talking subtext, there's another game we need to talk about, one which swaps out Ocarina's grace in favor of style. So much style, in fact, that the nostalgia oozes out of every aspect of it, from the visuals to the mechanics, the story, characters, and music. Shovel Knight is not only one of the best games of recent years, at least it feels recent even though it's been 7 years at this point, my god, we're all getting old. This game was constructed around the graphical limitations of the NES. Its music is such an homage to that era that 2 songs on the soundtrack were literally scored by Manami Matsume, the woman who scored Mega Man. And its gameplay is no slouch in the homage department either. From Zelda 2 it borrowed the pogo jump sword thrust thing, the passers-by lore dump villagers, and the combat function that once an enemy is hit, it resets itself to give you wiggle room to make your next move. From Mega Man, it took the fixed stage numbers in levels, as well as the boss introductions and functions. Mega Man's bosses showed up and started fighting the player. Shovel Knight's bosses work exactly the same, except the fight, generally speaking, has more dynamism to it, and there's a bit of dialogue we get before the fight to introduce us to these characters. The choice-focused level select overworld screen was taken from Super Mario 3. The HUD, being a super sprite layered into the background, is an NES staple, as is the black background for encountering larger creatures, something the NES did to limit the amount of colors on screen at any given time. The game also features screen shakes, which only move on a single axis at a given time, and it has the same sprite limit as the NES did. The bonfire quiet time sequences were lifted from Golden Axe, and its aesthetics draw on Castlevania. But all of these homages would be just that if the game didn't know how to tie it all together, and this is the true beauty of this game. Shovel Knight's entire story is about a knight reminiscing about the times he shared with his friend. In dialogues with other characters, we get the sense of a life having been lived in this universe. Alliances used to exist, and these people were at some point friends. The game paints the picture of a nicer era and then refuses to show it to us, because it knows that it's nostalgia. It knows that things were never really that simple, both in-game and in a more meta sense. Shovel Knight emulates the feel of old-school games, not the substance. It used the NES's color palette as its base, but it added a few colors. It has widescreen support, it does not feature the CRT anti-aliasing effect of its era, and it's pilfering ideas from more contemporary games as well, such as Dark Souls' corpse runs or BBV's gravity puzzles. The game breaks the rules in many places, but, and sorry for repeating the tired saying, but it's fine, because it's about how you remember things being, not how they really were. Which is a perfect way to describe nostalgia. More so than any other medium, I think games are uniquely qualified to express nostalgia because the input you use to engage with the work is capable of carrying the emotion. A movie can talk about nostalgia, and you can get nostalgic watching a childhood favorite, but a game can produce circumstances to simulate and stimulate nostalgia. Nostalgia's power does not come so much from the idea that things used to be better as they do that we believed them to have been better. Because as children we were sheltered from the harsher parts of the world, and nostalgia is a way to keep the optimism of that bright-eyed little kid alive. Like I said earlier, it's a very beautiful feeling, and a happy little trip back in time is a wonderful gift you can give to yourself. And for video games, I think that in nostalgia, there's yet an untapped potential for amazing experiences.